Okay, welcome everyone. I have been profoundly impacted by yesterday's keynotes. So just taking a deep breath here. It was listening to Selena's keynote yesterday morning touched me greatly about being in your personal space, and also listening to Ash's keynote as well. So if I have a bit of a shaky voice today, it's because of that. It's absolutely nothing to do with the content. I love this content. But I just wanted to put that out there. I know this is a safe space for me, so I appreciate that. Okay, on to the talk. I have an alter ego. I do, yes. I was once called a badass tester. I am a badass tester. But, you know, it's sort of like kind of sat with me, but didn't quite sit with me, because when I was first called this by Keith Klein, who first coined me as the badass tester, I just burst out laughing. I said, Keith, I am the biggest marshmallow ever. And so I put the two things together, and I asked Trish Koo if she's here today. She's the most amazing artist, as well as many other talents, Dungeons and Dragons and whatnot. I asked her to put this logo together for me. So I am the badass tester marshmallow. Now, the badass tester marshmallow does some bad things, I'm afraid. And we had a bit of a tussle in this keynote. The badass said to me, Anne-Marie, if we're going to talk about quality and software testing, we really need to have some definitions out there. And I'm like, come on, badass. Really? Everyone's going to have been at the cabaret the night before, starting a keynote with a definition? Ooh, come on, that's tough going. But the badass said, you know, Anne-Marie, come on, you got to do this. So here we go. Software testing. And I said, look, you know what? I'm going to help these poor folks out. So I decided to kind of shorten it or highlight a bit. What I like about this definition is the fact that it focuses software testing on an investigation, rather than it's a validation and confirming what you know. It's all about investigation, and I love that aspect about this definition of software testing. I also really like the fact that it emphasizes information, right? Instead of going, it's passed and it's failed, it's about providing the team as much information as possible in order that they can make informed decisions about quality. And I like, oh, that's really, really cool. And finally, there's a reminder that we don't do software testing in a bubble. We can't. Software testing is for something. There's a purpose behind it. Somebody wants to know that information. And so I really like this definition. And I think it's important, if we're going to start talking about software and quality, that we all have a shared understanding of that. In 2001, there was a book written called Lessons Learned in Software Testing. And lesson number 1 was, we are the headlights of the project. And I think, you know, when I read this, it was like, oh, wow, you know, that makes sense. You know, we shine a light on all the stuff that's happening so that people can make decisions about the quality and make quality-based decisions. It shines a light on possible things that are on the front of the road. If there's obstacles, we can see them. And it's like, oh, yeah, that's what we do. We shine a light. We help provide information to the rest of the team. But recently, something changed about this, because we bought a new car. And for us to buy a new car is like a really big thing. Like, before we had our new car, we had a Honda, it was a tiny little, it was a 2000 Honda Civic or something like that. And so we were very, very excited to get this new car. And with this new car, there came all these like loads of whiz-bang things that I had no idea you could do. For example, the windscreen wipers came on by themselves when it rained. And I was like, whoa, That's so cool. We have heated seats. Really, really, really useful in Australia. But the thing that profoundly made me think the most was I was driving down the road, and it was dusk, and suddenly the headlights went on by themselves. And I was like, whoa, this is so cool. And it got me thinking about this analogy about the headlights of the project. And I wondered, with the way that we develop software today, is that analogy still the same? Can we say that software testing is the headlights of the project? Or maybe there's a little more to it now. Because as Jeff said on Tuesday night, you know, we've moved into a very complex systems now that we're testing, where it's not easy to see input, output. It's not necessarily that we're testing software that was given to us on a hard drive, or given and we deployed it onto our systems. It's now an entirely different way. And perhaps it's time for us to kind of review some of the concepts we have about testing and quality. So, headlights. Right, fantastic. We all need headlights, except in the daytime. Right? Headlights are pretty useless for my 15-year-old who doesn't yet know how to drive. Headlights are pretty useless if we don't have any petrol in the car. And you can take this on more and more and think about the different analogies that actually it's not only about information down the road and where we're going, it's also about we need information in the car, don't we? And we have very complicated information now. We have lots of different gauges that we're actually analyzing, we're looking at, and we're measuring this constantly in the car in order for us to be able to get to where we want to be. One of the big changes we've seen is the GPS, right? The navigators in our cars, helping us know how long we have to go and whether we're at our destination yet. I have no idea what the next slide is. Okay, this one. Excellent. My point is, software testing does provide visibility, but quality tells us how far we have yet to go. And I think that so often we conflate the two. We think about software testing in terms of, you know, I mean, this happens all the time. We mix up the terminology. I'm a tester, I'm a QA, right? We talk about, let's look at quality, and then we have a 45-minute discussion on software testing. And it's as if that we can only talk about quality in terms of software testing. It's the only thing that's available to us. And I just wonder, you know, is that necessarily the case? You know, yes, sure, there are some other aspects about, you know, we do start looking at some things, and we have the concept of shift left. And we start looking in our planning sessions about providing and identifying potential risks before they even get developed, which is really, really cool. But, you know, I think in the days where everyone is questioning the value of software testing, I think would it be useful for us to take a step back and see where we can use our skills and apply them elsewhere? Another definition, but not quite so intense. And it's another definition which I really like, and it's Jerry Weinberg's definition of quality. So quality is value to some person, and I like this definition because of the subjective nature of quality. And we've all been there. Inherently, we know that quality changes constantly, doesn't it? What we think of what was valuable in 1980 or 1990 would seem as like archaic now. And I had proof of this just last week because my smartphone died. And I thought, you know, I've got this retro Nokia. I can handle this. I'm just going to put the SIM into my Nokia. And bingo, I'm going to be able to, I can handle life without a smartphone. And I've got a laptop, and I can use all the apps on the laptop, and, you know, I'm just going to have a phone that makes calls, and I can do a couple of text messages. Oh, boy. I'd forgotten how difficult it was to actually write text messages with 9 keys. Yeah, so that quickly went out, and I borrowed my husband's Samsung, which is telling me how long I have left to talk. But it is a really good reminder for me about how quality has changed, and our expectations change over time. And you can see this even when we develop software, or when we're testing. At the start of a project or the start of an iteration, we go in there and we're like, oh yeah, that's a bug, that's a SEV2 bug, yeah, we're definitely going to fix that. We get to the end of the iteration, SEV3, you know. And our ideas of what quality is does change over time, and that's okay. I mean, that's because we have constraints and we have to make decisions constantly about what is important and what is not important. So, but quality is valued to some person. It's really useful to think about in terms of also who are our stakeholders today. And I think this, I mean, Jeff's keynote where he talks about, you know, who are our customers? Maybe our customers are other developers now, right? Are we actually thinking about how we're serving them and how can we help them in providing information? One of the things I've been working on recently is in API exploratory testing. And I've been putting this class together, and one of the things that's come really up that's been a big discussion is the lack of discussion about API standards when people start. So a lot of organizations don't have commonality, consistency within their APIs. A lot of organizations don't have any kind of standard at all. And I think it's quite useful for testers to be coming in and thinking about how usable is the API for other people? How readable is it? How can we how can we help, how can we use our questioning skills to identify potential improvements in APIs in the design level? I think that's a really interesting area to be looking at. Someone else added, who matters? You know, if we think about software value to some person, quality could be never ending, right? And so we help focus it by looking at who is important to us. It is hot up here. All right. But a lot of this is all very high level, hofty-wavy, and they're like, Anne-Marie, if I go into my organization and say, you know, quality is is value to some person, yeah. I don't know about you, but the places I've worked need something a little bit more concrete. So I've been working on that, and one of the things that I've been looking at and I'm going to be talking today is about aspects of quality engineering, and also some new quality attributes. So quality engineering first. I really like this concept of quality engineering because for me, quality engineering is an opportunity to start thinking about quality in different ways rather than only at testing. And don't get me wrong, testing is vital. It's really important, and we mustn't forget that. But I think that the thing with software testing is that the nature of the beast is that it's often we can't do it until the software has been developed. It's inherently always going to be done later in the process. And sure, we can sort of iterate and do little bits as early as possible, but the reality is, until the software has been written, we can't really test it. So what happens is that we get surprises at the end, and no one likes surprises, especially people in charge. So how can we look at deconstructing quality and helping us think about different ways of implementing quality without software testing? So one of the thought exercises I ask people to do is imagine you couldn't do any software testing. How would you know you had good quality? And it's quite a useful exercise to think about, okay, well, I would have to make sure that my code was written really, really well, right? Well, how can we make that visible? What things can we do to help us show that we're writing good quality code, right? And there's lots of things that can be done, like peer reviews and pairing and things like that. They're not necessarily technical tools that we have to put in there, though there are things now that are helping. I think SonarQube is something that helps identify duplication in code and things like that, so and complexity. So, you know, there's things that we can start looking at, is how can we identify that we're actually writing quality code? How can we identify that we're splitting our stories correctly, right? Is there something we can do in that? How can we improve the quality of what we're delivering by making sure we know that we're designing the right thing? So quality engineering has a bit of a connotation for me, though. So I like to think more about contemporary quality engineering because I am senior enough to remember the times when we had quality engineering in the late 90s. And then what happened was that you would have a team, and something like ISO 9001 or something like that. We actually tried to implement this into software testing. It was an absolute nightmare, right? But what happened was you'd have an external team. They would decide what quality was, and that they would put that standard out there, and then each team had to demonstrate that they were meeting that process, and that they were demonstrating that they were doing quality processes and quality activities that would demonstrate that quality engineering was being met. And so it got to the point that we would actually be doing things like documenting our meetings, right? And can you imagine today trying to document a stand-up? You know, I mean, I think the reality is that the intent was probably good behind this, but the way that it was rolled out provided and made it a very onerous and heavy type of activities that took away from the value of actually delivering product. And we don't want to do that. So I've been looking at ways and how can we improve quality and look at different aspects without actually making it heavy for the teams to roll out. This is Margaret Dineen's work. She gave this to me just late last night. So this is proof that, yes, slides come in right at the last minute. But it was so good, I really wanted to share it with you. And it's some of the wonderful work that is happening at the moment in the quality engineering space, and in particular in the Women in Testing Slack channel. So, and she came up with this, the pickle. So the pickle heuristic, or the pickle mnemonic, which identifies the value of you as a member in the team, and that you will, at every opportunity, push to improve quality and use it as an opportunity to learn new things. That you facilitate conversations, and I think this is one of the big things in contemporary quality engineering, is that emphasis on collaboration and communication, something that was never there in the old process. To respect knowledge and the knowledge of others, I think that's really important. And consistently work to improve understanding. Listening to others, and in general helping the team evolve over quality. So it's moving away from this concept of having one person in the team who's the gatekeeper to quality, which we know hasn't worked for us, right? We end up having all this responsibility, but without any actual autonomy to make any decisions about what to do with it. So it's like, yes, that's wonderful, Anne-Marie, you found this most amazing bug, but we're going to ignore it, right? It's like, oh. That happened in my first job. I was so excited that I found it. I probably shouldn't have jumped up and down the hallway, so excited that I found this bug. That probably was a little bit tactless, but... But anyway, but the whole thing is, you know, we want to be looking at ways where we can have this concept of quality being everybody's responsibility. How do we actually implement something like that? Everybody nods, yeah. But what does that actually mean for your team? What does it actually mean on a day-to-day activity? Does it just mean that everybody does testing? And wouldn't that be a really interesting question to ask to your team? What it means to them? And what would be the things that they would see are threats to quality? These are all things that we, as people in the quality space, and really experts in the quality space when you compare yourself to everyone else in the organization, right? These are things that you could be asking people. I put together this model, and it's totally, you know, it's just there. It's a thing. But it's my 5 Ps. I recently discovered that Rob Meany's got a testability model with the 10 Ps. I don't know. I'm going to have to find some more Ps. But yeah, so really what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to say we want to split up. Quality is not only about the product. Quality is about a lot of different things. And we can see that already people starting to think about that in the pipeline space, right? The quality of the pipeline. And what is a good pipeline for our organization? How do we know that the pipeline is actually doing what it's supposed to do? What happens if something goes wrong in the pipeline? What happens if we lose some of the environments or we lose information? How does that impact? These are all questions that we, in the testing or the quality space, can be asking. Process. What are the processes around that we're doing? I think one of the really interesting things that we have done in software testing, without maybe it hasn't been formally identified, but we have removed an incredible amount of waste in software testing. If you think about the standards and the types of testing that was done even 10 or 15 years ago, and how much onerous processes and documentation there was, we removed all that ages ago before Lean was invented. We invented exploratory testing, which is about focusing on the activity and doing that. Right? So we know that we can do these things in our community. We know that we're good at identifying value. We know that we're good at identifying threats to value. So how can we take those concepts and apply it to lots and lots of different areas? I bet we can. So looking at different processes, the different practices that are performed. And finally, and really most importantly, it's all about the people. You know, how are we collaborating? I worked in one organization where we had what we called embedded testers. And there was a tester in each team, and they were moving towards cross-functional teams, but they weren't quite there yet. And the tester was the first person, really, to be embedded in the team who wasn't a developer. So you can imagine there was a lot of learning that needed to take place for teams to adjust. And, you know, one of the big questions that often came up was, what does the tester do? You know, it's like, we're programming, what does the tester do? And I was like, well, you've got to find this out. This is your team, you know. But, you know, gradually over time, you know, it became really, really, really popular thing. And people were like, we can't have a team without a tester in it. But the focus on the testers was we were so used to working together as a team that we had that sharing, we had that collaboration, and now that we're working independently in teams, we really miss that. We miss working with people who understand what we're doing. We miss kind of the conversations and the jokes and the camaraderie you have with working with people that you feel comfortable with. And whilst they really recognized that the value of having the tester in the team, they really missed the relationships. And so they worked in ways to collaborate and communicate. So we had, you know, and a lot of people here are doing the same things, having Slack channels, having questions in Slack channels, having stand-ups, just tester stand-ups and sharing information. One of the big things that came out of that was that the testers were sharing information about potential threats, and they were sharing that information to the other teams. So what was happening is that the information about the system was being shared throughout the whole organization without anybody fully intending that to happen. And it was like the testers became the information providers of what was going on in the other teams. Oh, I heard that the API, they're planning to make a change in the API on that. And I think that affects your team, doesn't it? Oh, yeah, let's go and have a conversation about that. That was really, really effective. There are 3 circles in the middle here. And we might come to that a bit later. But really the intention here is that we want to be focusing, so often we focus on the quality of the product, right? Is the product good enough? But really, how can we think about quality in terms of our business and what the business wants? How can we think of quality and knowing that we've achieved these? And one of the experiments we worked at was looking at OKRs and using the OKRs to help us start thinking about quality and developing quality type experiments within the organization. This was one of them. So do you remember I was saying this airy-fairy, what is quality? What I did in one organization was to sit down with everyone in the team and ask them what quality meant to them. So we used that basic model that we had before, and we didn't use every single sort of quadrant, or it's not a quadrant, it's a 5-tent, whatever. But we basically decided what the areas we wanted to focus on. One of them was product, one of them was people. And then we decided, well, what are the things in these quadrants that are really important to us? What are the threats to quality? And so people started writing post-its and putting them into the different quadrants. And once we'd done that, we took a step back and we looked at it and we had a conversation about that. And then we decided to break that down into tasks. So rather than, I think sometimes when we look at quality, it's so big, like, oh, we want to improve performance. It's like, that's going to take a massive project. That's going to be really hard for us to get the budget for. That's going to be really hard to get the time for and equipment, So instead of sort of looking at it that perspective, it's like we broke it down and thought, what is the smallest thing that we can do to move into the right direction? What is the smallest experiment we can do that's not too costly and that we can try to help us see and identify whether there's a problem, or maybe it's collecting information because we actually have no idea at all. Maybe what we could do is look at, but maybe we do have a budget, maybe we can look at a tool. And we took that, and so people got really excited because it was something tangible that could be worked on. It was just something that could be that's concrete, and we can collect some data, create some data in that space. After that, we made sure that somebody owned that. So rather than just going, okay, now we have an idea of what the experiment is, we put that on, somebody took that, somebody who was really interested in that, and I think that's really important, who wanted to run with that experiment. And I think this is one of the big things in quality engineering that I'm seeing, is that it's not necessarily the testers or the quality people coming up with the ideas. It's not necessarily the quality people who are fixing the problems, but they're asking the right questions in order to enable teams to think about the problem, to discover the problem, to recognize there is a problem, and then they go away and think about how to fix that, or how can we as engineers go in and solve that problem. There was a situation where I worked at a company. It was a fintech with about 250 people, and they were doing amazing work, and it was incredibly, I was very, very privileged to work there to learn about some of the agile practices they were doing there. They were doing pair programming and test-driven development, and it was just really hardcore stuff. It was really exciting to be learning about that. But one of the things that they discovered is that we had, because we were doing very much an MVP refactor approach to building a product, we hadn't really, purposefully really, we hadn't thought about performance. And so we had no idea about the number of transactions or whether this was going to be a problem or not. And it was just an off-chance conversation I had with someone else. And I thought, oh, I wonder if performance is going to be an issue for us or not. And so I collected, we formed a swarm. And by a swarm is that what we do is we identify people who are interested, and we make a small little group of people who are interested in solving the problem. So people, testers who maybe had a bit of time in their team, came together and we created this sort of really short project where we could perform some experiments to identify if is there a problem here. We took that information and we provided that information to the engineering team who were working on that microservice. And they were like, oh, this is really useful information. There's actually a real problem. And they went off and took that and furthered that and created some, they redesigned their architecture in order to be able to, A, do performance a lot earlier and easier for themselves, and secondly, to be able to include performance testing in their pipeline. So it's sort of just little examples of what can be done without necessarily thinking, oh, we've got to have an end-to-end performance testing platform. That might not be the case. It could be that you can break down the problem into lots and lots of little things and help solve that problem through lots of little activities rather than one big one. And I think we have some new quality attributes. We have things to think about. People say it's no longer the large eating the small. It's the fast eating the slow. And we're so caught up in our quality triangle thingy, where we have time, quality and speed are against each other. And they always, we're always going to lose quality in, if we increase speed. But think of it from the business's perspective and why they want speed. They want speed so they can respond to change. And they can learn and do experiments. So it's important for them to be able to do this rapidly. How can we respond to that desire without compromising on the quality? Having a quality attribute as a consideration might be one way in opening a new discussion within your organization about measuring this. Feedback. And a part of that is without, the focus is on organizations about learning. Yeah, so Jeff was talking about the interesting thing is how good is our feedback? How good are the actions that we have on our feedback? I was having a great conversation with Rob Meany yesterday about some of the activities he's doing in his organization, and you should honestly go and have a talk to him. It's some amazing stuff. He talks really, 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 really quickly, though. So, just ask him to slow down. Yeah, I think you're great, Rob. Sorry, he's gone all red now. But we were having this amazing conversation about, how do you identify that you're looking at the right problems? And what he did, and he's going to ask, he's created this actual model where he can break down a bug. So if they find a bug in a serious bug, they have a retro and a review to identify what were the problems and the root causes of that bug. But he's broken it down to so many different elements that, what is the impact, what was the impact? I can't remember all the rest of them, there's too many, but it is such a detailed analysis of that, and it looks into the future about, okay, what can we as an organization learn from this problem? What can we change in our processes and our practices that help us develop software in an improved way? And it's wonderful stuff, so do go and see him and ask him for that. Or write a blog post, Rob. Elizabeth Hendrickson, who doesn't love Elizabeth? One of the last things that she wrote about in the quality space is recovery over perfection. And the idea that we must stop looking at trying to deliver perfect software. So we want to have great software, and don't get me wrong, that's really, really important. We mustn't lose that. But we want to be thinking about how well do our systems recover from problems? How well do our teams are able to identify problems in the systems when they're in production? And are we measuring our ability to recover from a problem as opposed to spending all our time trying to make sure that the product is perfect? And we know that's not possible. Right? It's not possible to have perfect software. So, let's be a little bit kind to ourselves and think, okay, maybe we should be spending some of our energy identifying the risks in production and how we can start looking at that, measuring that, and understanding what those risks are. I invented a word. Yay! Qualitability. And really, I think it's when we think about understanding quality and knowing quality, we want to be thinking about quality from day one. We don't want to wait right to the end of the project to think about, have we done a good job, right? We want to be thinking from day one, is this a good, are we doing good quality practices? How are we going to know whether we have a good quality, whether we have good quality or not? How are we going to be able to see this? And so I thought, well, why not make this an ility? We need more ilities. So qualitability is the ability to how easy or hard it is to know and see the state of quality at any point in time, right? And when you think about testability, testability is how easy or hard it is to test something. This is how easy or hard it is to see that state of quality. And if you think about, can we start making quality visible from day one? That's the question that we want to know, because if we can have consistent visibility across, then maybe we're not going to be quite so surprised at the end. Big thing here. Big thing for me. I don't know if anyone who's read Who Moved My Cheese, but I thought this was funny. I told you the story about the embedded testers and how the embedded testers are in their teams, and they were doing some fabulous work. The developers were doing great work as well, because they did a lot of the automation, freeing up the testers to do exploratory testing. But one of the things that it became apparent over time as the teams became more kind of familiar and the developers started learning from the testers about the types of bugs and the types of tests that they were creating, was the testers' time was being quite freed up quite a bit. It was almost like they had sort of educated the team on the typical types of bugs that were being found in that system. And yet, at that point, we hadn't sort of thought about what else could the testers do. And it made me question that often we get entrenched in a role or in a position or a team, and we forget that really the skills that we have within that team can be used in a lot of different places. And one of the big things that I see in being so focused on a microservice or being so focused on testing in a team is that you lose the big picture, yeah? And the big picture is the thing that the customer cares about. The customer doesn't give a damn whether you have microservices or not, or whether you're, whether you're using automation. They just want to get their problem solved. So I think one of the huge values is having the ability to be able to jump in and out of different contexts and to use your skills at a system level and to develop potentially looking at other things outside of functional testing within your team. If your team is working really well in that space, you can move out and try different things. So what are the sorts of things that we could look at? I've mentioned some of these. Poor story splitting, right? Learning about that. Oh, that's not my domain. Well, I don't know, maybe you could work with getting to understand what those potential risks are and understanding what the problems are. And using that in your quality workshop model is like, what's the first step we can take to enabling something to change in that space? Recoverability, can we start measuring that, our ability to recover from mistakes? How are we doing in that space as a general thing? Monitoring, people often talk a lot about monitoring, but how well are we using it, and how well are we implementing that information, and how well are we using that feedback, all that data that we have? Are we actually using it to help us make informed decisions? A big thing for a lot of testing is the test environment setup. How can we remove waste in that space? How can we remove waste in build times? That gets developers really excited, right? And it's interesting. Have you ever stopped and had a look at the automated tests that have been written? A lot of the time, there's a huge amount of duplication in there, right? If you think that every test has a cost, then that's quite significant. It's a cost to design, a cost to maintain, a cost to run, a cost to identify whether there's a problem or not. There's lots and lots of costs within that test. So if we're having lots of duplication in our automation, maybe it's worthwhile taking out some of that. Now, I know a lot of the reasons why we have duplication in automation is because of flaky tests, right? But I think that it's nearly like a safety net. But I think about, asking the hard questions in that space. Well, why do we have flaky tests? How can we design our systems in the future so that maybe we can start helping those tests not to be so flaky? Can we look at isolating some of our tests and mocking up some systems so we reduce that dependency on external systems, things like that. Okay, the badass made me say the bad word. Metrics, yes. Okay, so I have come up from an engineering background. I first started working in a company that was very heavy on metrics. I learned about software testing when I became a test lead, but it was all about counting test cases. It was all about identifying, how many bugs in production versus how many bugs have we found before. And, I spent so much time counting this information that actually I didn't even know really what was being tested. And I think a lot of people identified it was a very difficult time for testing. And it removed us from the actual what is the purpose of what we're doing. Software testing is an activity, it's not a process. And in the attempt to try and have understand more about how our software testing is doing, we forgot about the software testing. And we don't want to make those mistakes again. So we do want to, but metrics are incredibly useful for us because they're a way of providing information. It's just another form of information, right? And we can use that to help us understand better and to have conversations. So I did kind of make a little bit of a change. So they help make aspects of quality improvement visible, right? They're not great for everything. They're not going to help us. They're not the silver bullet. But they certainly are really useful in having conversations with senior people. They're really useful in collecting data to better understand something. So rather than looking at metrics to say, have we actually met this level? It's more about looking at, let's collect data and let's see what we can learn from that data. And I think if you have that mentality of looking at information, you're going to learn a lot. And it's going to be interesting, it's going to be fun, right? Rather than using it as something to demonstrate, I have reached this amount of value. Right. Also looking at quality in terms of trends. Whoa, I just realized I only got 3 minutes left. Okay, so anyway, as I was saying, we'll move on. Right. My quality levels, my journey. Okay, so looking at teams. So focus on teams. Don't go in thinking about standards across a whole organization. There are lots of great ideas in teams, but also the context within the teams are so different. It doesn't make sense a lot of the time to have metrics across different teams. But enable the team to decide their own metrics, enable the team to experiment with measuring stuff and identifying if that information is going to help them or not. And it's the team that decides what the metric should be, not some external organization. Think about business outcomes rather than being done. So think about what is the business outcome, what is the intent of this feature, as opposed to what is the, this feature is done. So try and think about from a business context rather than necessarily just deploying a product. Don't forget that it's nuanced, and metrics can tell lies and they can be used badly. So think about how they might be misused. Think about how this might bias people in a bad way. But always constantly emphasize this is about learning new things. It's not about demonstrating that you've met a benchmark. Okay, I'm going to flick through these. These are some wonderful quality indicators that some women in the Women in Test Slack channel, maybe some of you, what is this Women in Testing Slack channel? What do they talk about? Right, we talk about quality indicators. So, and this was a lovely one. How happy and confident are you with this release? Nice, easy thing to measure. To look, it's a qualitative one, it's not necessarily quantitative. I reckon this is really useful. Jenny Bramble, looking at thinking about team morale. And I think this is another thing that's really useful. How happy is your team? Happy teams will create products in a healthy way and happy way. I'll flick through this. It's worth looking at some of Paul Hammond's stuff. He's got some really interesting things, but look at it from a testing perspective rather than this is what we have to do. Look at the things like, branch models and, is this something that's worth measuring in our organization? Is this something worth looking at, and how well are we doing these things? How do we know whether these are good things, or how do we know we have a problem here? One of my favorite quotes, John Cutler, he has a great blog post, and I really encourage you to go and have a read about it, where he talks about that whole concept of a feature being done. Don't, if you think about your business in terms of this feature has been developed in order to increase revenue, do you know what the increase in revenue is going to be for that feature? Has anyone discussed that? How would you test for that? That'd be interesting, right? So I think there's, we can expand some of our thinking of the thinking that we use in our testing, we can expand it and increase the scope. And maybe these are ways of helping people see that you're actually providing real value to your organization. Make quality improvement vivid. I talked really briefly about this. Small experiments over big projects. Don't feel like you have to get the data perfect. Do a rough data. This is all about learning. It's not about being perfect. So learning, if the experiment's not working for you, stop it. Try something else. It's all about feedback. It's all about learning something new. It's not about getting it absolutely perfect. So just to finish off, the marshmallow part of me wrote this. This is how I like to end it. So software testing is the headlights. Absolutely, really important headlights, looking outwards. Quality is the journey, but the business outcomes are the destination. We don't get a taxi to come home to our house in order to have, the destination is not our house, it's in order for us to relax and be at home with our loved ones, right? And the same way, quality and what we deliver is not necessarily about delivering something, it's about helping someone achieve something and really understanding that. Thank you.